sure that's running before we get started. So as I did mention previously, I am in Perth in Western Australia currently, but I'm actually working in Hong Kong at Hong Kong International School. I've been there now for 2 years, so I've just come back for the summer holidays, doing the quarantine gauntlet, hoping that I can get home next week, but we'll see how that goes. But I've been there for 2 years now. It's an American school, so I'm teaching the American curriculum. So I'll reflect on that as we go through. But really, where this sort of presentation spurred from was the Worldwide Developers Conference, which happened actually while I was in quarantine, coming back to Australia. So once again, Swift Playgrounds took the main stage. The first time it took the main stage, I was actually lucky enough to be at the Worldwide Developers Conference when it was held in San Francisco, when it was launched. But now what we've heard is a major upgrade, which is going to allow our students to push apps using Swift Playgrounds to the App Store. Now, a lot of this functionality is actually already available inside Swift Playgrounds. So we can actually design and develop apps using both UIKit, which is the user interface library, if you're not familiar with it, but we can also use SwiftUI, which is the new way of designing and building applications. So in the first half of this presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the programs that I've run at various schools in different cities. And then towards the second half, I'm going to actually show you Swift Playgrounds. We're going to get our hands dirty, and I'm going to get you to actually start to build something for yourselves. So I divided these 3 different schools into different categories. They're my hackers, my hipsters, and my hustlers. And as I mentioned, I'm going to go through these 3 very different schools, talk about how we used Swift Playgrounds and SwiftUI to develop really unique courses. Now, I'm not saying that each of your schools could be categorized into these different personality traits. But really, these schools had varying in different demographics, cultural differences, the parent bodies are different, and we also have very different funding situations. So I'm hoping that you could relate to at least one of them, and that way you can try and sort of target yours a little bit and really try and find courses which are relevant for your students. Because as we know, in order to attract both internal and external funding, especially those of you who are in the university sector, we need to make sure that we're engaging our stakeholders, and those could be the parents, but more importantly, I think, are also the students. As we know, bums on seats means more teachers, it means more students, and it means more funding. And that's sort of the world we live in, especially in high school as a non-core subject. We need to make sure that we do have those marketable courses. Before I start getting into the first school, I also want to reflect on what your curriculum blueprint is for your school. So what I mean by this is, what are the long-term transferable skills that you want to have for your students when they graduate, when they finish your unit, when they finish your course, be it a semester or a year long. Trying to think what the transferable goals are and how they align with the school's strategic goals. So for example, do you want your students to be critical thinkers? Do you want them to be creative? Are you trying to get them a maths credit? Are you trying to get them a geometry credit? Are you trying to get them an arts credit, which is the case in the current school that I'm in? Computer science is such a huge area, and if you include IT in this as a general topic, it's too massive to sort of take on it all. So we need to really make sure that we narrow down. And Kane, can't hear any sound. Can I just get an okay that everyone else can hear some sound? As I mentioned, I am monitoring the chat, so if there's any issues or you want me to repeat something, please do let me know. All right, everyone's okay. Kane, I think it might just be you. Just make sure you got your speakers turned up. Kane, I did also mention that I have recorded this as well, so we can go back to it at any point. As I was mentioning about the scope of IT in Australia, they're very, very lucky. We've got a national curriculum. UK is very much the same, where we can sort of define the scope of what we are teaching, what we are delivering to our students with a little bit of leeway there. But really what we need to try and define is, what are the general ICT capabilities? What is something which we expect to be taught in every single subject? And then what are we focusing on inside our IT classes? Because we don't want our students to be jack of all trades. We want our students to get away with some definable skills, hopefully some job skills, which is a core focus for me within my course. I want to make sure that when my students leave, they're confident to utilize a programming language and actually be able to develop their own projects. Within international schools, we often hear the ISTE standards, and this is a similar thing to the general ICT capabilities. This is our general standards for teachers, and basically gives a benchmark for what we expect all kids to use. So things like utilizing file systems, whilst we may teach that for the purpose of submitting assessments, it's not a core key deliverable within a computer science course. So it's just something we need to ensure that's not within our scope of work. Again, looking back at the Australian curriculum, we have the digital technologies curriculum. This will allow us to really focus on that creation of solutions. So in terms of our thinking methodologies, we look at computational thinking, we look at design thinking, and we also look at systems thinking. So systems thinking in the sense of this is how we interact with systems rather than the sociology or psychology way of thinking of systems thinking in terms of community. So how do people interact and utilize systems? So this is where my courses sort of have their base level. Again, if we were to look at international standards, perhaps we could look at the CSTA standards, computer science standards. These are used a lot across American schools, but have also been utilized for the national curriculum in the UK and also Canada, and redeveloped for IB, etc., to take out some of the fluff. However, these are widely used and they give you a good place to think about what should be included inside your computer science course or your development course, and what shouldn't, to really ensure that it is relevant for your students. So my first school, my Hustlers, I was working at a high-performing boys' school here in Perth, Christchurch Grammar School. My students were very, very motivated. They were very competitive, as a lot of boys are. And parents would happily spend a lot of money in their child's interest. So we didn't really have issues for funding for different programs. Obviously, my students had devices. That wasn't the real concern with my course at this stage. When I came to this school, I was a tech coach, just to give you an idea of scope. When I present, a lot of teachers say, okay, well, that was easy for you because you were such and such position. But across these three schools, I'm going to demonstrate how I made some changes and modified things based on the different positions that I had. So as a tech coach, I had control over, for example, devices and things which happen, the systems that we interacted with. But what I could and what all teachers have control of is exactly what happens in your students' experience. What happens in each lesson is within your definable scope and something which you really have influence of. So at the time that I was at this school, we were early adopters of the iPad. We had iPad 1. It didn't have the front-facing camera, and we really started to think about how we could phase out computer labs and our laptop trolleys to integrate this new mobile device. At first, expectations were pretty low. The Australian government was giving funding to buy devices. We didn't expect there to be too much impact on the classroom itself. We wanted our students to be connected through email, have access to the internet. But my job, obviously, as a tech coach was to find some sort of relevance. So as I mentioned, our students were really mathematically inclined. They had a strong business mindset. So what I thought is I would design a course marketed as digital thinking, which would really pull on that culture of excellence in mathematics. The course focused on informatics, which is a combination of mathematics and problem solving, algorithmic thinking, and really pulling on, as I mentioned, that passion. So as a result of that, at the same time, Swift Playgrounds a year later got released onto the iPad. As I mentioned, I was lucky enough to be at WWDC when this got released. And when I started coding myself, I really loved Logo and Python Turtle and that visual output which is available within that. So I developed Geometry for Swift Playgrounds, which is a freely available playground for you to develop, which allowed me to, sorry, let me go back, which allowed me to have my students step through their code and allow them to visualize what they're learning. And this was something which was important to me in the way that I learned. It allowed us to debug our code and ensure that when we were having conversations with students, or when we integrated this into a streamlined subject, that the conversation was more about the mathematics and the algorithm and less about the individual coding. So as a result of this program that I implemented, our performance in our national standards test, the NAPLAN test as it's called in Australia, went up in a unique area in spatial reasoning. And this is an area across the board in Australia, which a lot of students struggle with their spatial reasoning. And for an iPad program, which really didn't have much relevance, what we found was something which was really tackling an area which the students found relevant, which the parents found relevant, and a unique sort of niche that we could really attack in this space. My second school that I'm going to speak about is Corpus Christi College. Again, this is a different sort of demographic. This was a Catholic K-12 school. We had both male and female students. So coming from a boys' school, my focus was really to make sure that we ensured that the female students were involved. But also we had a fairly working, middle-class working family who worked in a lot of fly-in, fly-out jobs on the mines. So sometimes the parents were quite absent, or one parent was there and the other one wasn't. But it was a unique sort of situation in the demographics of this course, of this school. So as I moved into this role, I became the director of IT, so I had a lot more pull. I'd seen the success of iPad and slowly moved them away from a one-to-one iPad program, a one-to-one laptop program into a one-to-one iPad program. And the reason for this was mainly financial. I felt that the device which they currently had costs our parents a lot of money on top of books and uniform and all those sort of things which are involved in private education. But what I did was transition them over to their devices, and the Everyone Can Code curriculum really became the backbone for the learning experience. As the director of IT, I had a lot less teaching time. I had to delegate and ensure that my staff were well trained. But as we know, in schools, there aren't a lot of computer science teachers who are qualified. So we had to ensure that there was a lot of upskilling of my staff. I had PE teachers, I had deputy principals, I had home economics teachers all teaching these courses. So that Everyone Can Code, as I mentioned, was really that backbone. But what we pulled on as school was that love of engineering, that love of robotics, that love of hands-on, the kind of things which were relevant to their community. And with the iPad, at this point, we started to see BLE or light Bluetooth get implemented. We saw all these excellent peripherals being developed. We could now connect Swift Playgrounds to Arduino boards, to Raspberry Pis, and really start to become a leader in this space of robotics. And again, this is where we started to market our course. We started to market our school in this engineering space, where a lot of schools were saying they were a STEM school, where a lot of schools were saying they were doing coding. It's hard for parents to really grasp and get an understanding of what students are actually doing in the class. So we felt with our demographic, we could create some really relevant learning opportunities for our students in this engineering space. And again, it complemented our other subject areas and our school goals. This creative problem solving was really the cornerstone that made it a desirable field. At first, with my original goal, I thought that the female students wouldn't really engage in what we were trying to do. in actual fact, they loved the making, they loved the creation, they loved that physical problem solving that really drew them in. So as a result of this course, 50% of my students chose to continue with coding after the compulsory course, which I implemented. And a third of those students were females. So we saw a huge increase in this space. The last school I'm going to speak to you about before we get into a little bit of practical coding are my hipsters. So this is my current school that I'm at, Hong Kong International Schools, my first international stint, or tour, as some call it. I have relinquished a lot of my influence. I am now a lowly teacher. My sole focus is my students and their experience within the classroom. Obviously, I work for fantastic leaders who allow me the opportunity to make changes and do things as I see fit. But the unique thing about this school is, first of all, it's an American curriculum. It's an international school, so we do have a lot of sway in what we can do. But also, I'm positioned within the art department. So my focus and the credits for my courses are arts degrees. So whilst coding is the tool that we use for developing our products, our solutions, the focus is the actual product itself, not the code. So I'm not quizzing students on, what is an if statement, is this a search or sort algorithm, all those sort of things. Whilst they do use those algorithms, they do investigate and research to use them. The whole purpose of it is the product and what they're trying to create. So this course, we've gone a little bit further. We're now exploring how we can use the iPad to develop full-blown applications. So we want to develop at a higher level. The Develop with Swift series is the backbone now for what I'm trying to develop with the students. We want them to go a little bit further with their exploration of the language. And these resources are basically what the students focus on and what the students use. Now, not many people may say this, but I think COVID has actually helped me with my mission and what I'm trying to achieve. I've definitely seen an acceleration of adoption in terms of devices, in terms of the pedagogy and the way that I'm actually delivering my courses. So what I had to do in order to get these new courses underway was to ensure that students had options. So I had to do the very unpopular thing for teachers, which is join multiple classes together to ensure that students had options. So what that means is during one particular period, I may be teaching 3 different courses. And now this is an instructional nightmare. So what I did was to go back to our blended learning approach, ensure that all of my courses have pre-recorded materials, ensure that every piece of content which I want to make available for my students are available, so that they could self-manage their progress throughout the content, and I could help them with troubleshooting, get to know them one-on-one, and also have those class discussions. So it's a different sort of pedagogy and approach, but as I mentioned, I really wanted to ensure that my students had choice. As we know, if a course doesn't have the bums on the seats, it simply won't run. So when you're proposing new courses, whilst they may be flashy in the beginning, they may get some adoption in the beginning, we need to ensure that there's a pathway for our students to ensure they get to, in this case for the American system, our AP courses. But really what I've found is we're developing courses now in machine learning and data science, which go far beyond the curriculum of advanced placement courses, which is sort of like our A levels or GCSE sort of level courses, which is our higher end. The big approach for our projects, once the students had developed their skills, was really around design thinking. And again, COVID just gave us a huge context. The first time that I ran my courses and students had to design different projects based on their community and the problems that affected them. We heard lots of things about how we can make more efficient lunch lines, how we can have voting for uniform policies. But then as soon as COVID hit, we had this more global perspective. My students were developing apps to help, as you can see in this picture, help tutoring for underprivileged kids who are trapped in small apartments in Hong Kong. A lot of students came up with ideas for tracing contact well before Google got onto it, and developed different solutions and a backbone for that. But as I mentioned, with the technologies available within Swift Playgrounds, also within Xcode, it makes it very approachable for students to develop relevant applications. So this is an example of a recycling app. In this course, I actually had some students who decided they wanted to try tackle the same problem in Python. But this student made a well-developed product. Sure, the design could have some improvements. However, this was developed within a month's space, and she can successfully identify plastics, paper, and glass, as well as aluminium cans, to see if they can be recycled, and also to give some classification on that. A similar project which was developed in Python, and the student developed their own neural network, etc. They were only able to identify if it was a can or if it was not. So within the same space of time, you can see how students can really develop something and develop an understanding of a quite advanced technology. Sure, if they were to go into industry, they would have to expand their knowledge within Python. But what we're really doing is giving some students some success in this space to ensure that they have an interest, and ensure that they develop and continue their hard work in this area. So with the success of this, and this is only my end of my second year, I've had 200% more students. So currently we're starting to think about strategies about if we can hire another teacher to expand this even further. I've moved some of my AP courses to self-study because the students are so well prepared that they can sort of do that on the side. And again, in my previous goal for the school, I've got 20% more female students. I mean, I don't feel like I can take all the credit for the amount of female students that are increasing. I do believe that computer science as a whole is becoming more attractive and more inclusive. But I definitely feel like the projects and the relevance of what the students are doing and creating within these spaces, developing pitches for their ideas, sharing it with their peers, and really focusing on that product is really a draw card for what students are achieving and their interest in the subject. Now, a couple of times I've mentioned the backbone for all of my courses, and Apple has a very clearly defined curriculum pathway all the way from your puzzles and your adventures, as Chad was mentioning before, the space where he starts. But if you're not sure where to begin, this is really a safe space. It's really gentle. It can be given to your students to self-study. So if you have a keen student who really wants to get into things, it's the kind of place that you can send them. Its tutorials are well-defined and updated with videos, etc. I do develop a lot of my own materials past these books and to support these, which I publish on YouTube, so they're available for you if you'd like to investigate. But really, I'd say this is a place to start. As I mentioned, UI Kit does work on Swift Playgrounds on both Xcode and on the iPad. So this is all relevant. You obviously just can't do the drag and drop things which are available in the books, but the code and the language are exactly the same. The libraries are available to you as well. Okay, so we're going to get into a little bit of coding now. As I mentioned, I was sitting in quarantine for 2 weeks when I came here. So I was spending a lot of time on Apple Fitness. I managed to get myself a bike up into the hotel room. So we're going to model this a little bit off Apple Fitness. I'm going to give you a little introduction as a warm-up to Swift Playgrounds, and show you where the buttons are and how to sort of navigate around it. And then I'm going to try and get you up and running. So I'm going to go through 3 different milestones, which will show you SwiftUI. Will introduce you to the platform and the framework of how we can develop this. But what I've also done is set you a little bit of homework if you want to extend yourself and stretch yourself out a little bit, so you can actually develop a fully functioning game within Swift Playgrounds. Now, this code that I'm writing will work on both Xcode playgrounds and also on iOS. So both those options are available for you depending on your situation within your school. And I think that's a great thing of where we're heading in this space. I'll show you some resources later on as well. For example, like this Swift one-pager. This is just something useful to put up into your classroom and make available for your students just to understand the different hidden menus and where things are available. All right, so I'm going to flick over now to Swift Playgrounds. I'm going to give you an insight into it a little bit. So just bear with me while I flick. So I'm going to demonstrate this on my iPad, so it's available for you. I do use the Magic Keyboard, which I think is fantastic. So if you're wondering why I'm typing quickly, credit all to that nice piece of hardware. Okay, so this is Swift Playgrounds. We can pull in files from different locations. For example, my Files app. So previously I was playing a little bit with ARKit and I was pulling in some reality scenes, which I was playing with here. But all of the major libraries are available. I think the only one that I haven't seen available is NFC. Obviously that's limited by the hardware on the device. But this is a fantastic experience, particularly on the iPad, to develop AR experiments, especially if you have an iPad Pro with the LiDAR sensor, because if you're developing them in Xcode, you've got to plug in a device, load it to that device to test anything out. So it's a great space. So here I have my library of all my playgrounds, which I've used before. You do have a search functionality and you can sort it also. I can press the select button on the top right, which will allow me to select multiple files, delete them, duplicate them, and also share them. They're also a nice little package if you're getting students to submit. It's got a nice package available within that single file to submit. I know my students struggle a little bit with submitting Xcode projects, but we'll see how this goes. I can right-click or tap and hold on the name of the file to rename it. So it's normally the first thing I do get my students to do. And if I scroll down here, you can see all. These are templates by Apple, also by third parties, which allow you to have some structured activities for your students. So for example, the Learn to Code 1, 2, and 3 is a good place to start for your students, as I showed you in that curriculum plan. And then we've also got some other things like Lights, Camera, and Code, which allows you to start looking at hardware sensors, flashy photos, which looks at image manipulation. There's a couple of games and challenges and those sort of things as well. You can also access third-party playgrounds. So for example, here is a Swift teacher collaboration that I developed with a couple of Apple Distinguished Educators, which have various games and code. None of the code is compiled, so you can see all of the examples and all the code available and have a little play. So we tried to look at some cross-curricular ideas here. And there's a nice SwiftUI calculator, which is created by Dave Brown, who's currently in the session. We also have available different playgrounds available for different peripherals. For example, Microbit, Adafruit's a fantastic one if you want to look at Arduino playgrounds. We have our Italian ADE friends who have also developed a lot of content for their context as well. And as I mentioned, my geometry playground is available as well. So there's heaps and heaps of content. At the very, very bottom, you can see some of those developers like MakeBlock who have the playgrounds available. You can simply click on them and subscribe, and it will make those available for you. Where we're going to start is in the starting points, and we're going to create a blank playground. Okay, as I mentioned, I like to get my students to rename it. So we're going to call this Learning Festival and save that. And this is where we will be beginning. Excuse me, I'm just going to mute for a second. And I'm back. So inside our Learning Festival, if we click on this file, it'll launch up the browser for us. And as we can see, we have our section here, which is basically our directory. If I want to move these around, I need to press the edit button, and this will allow me to add new files, rename, or delete. We also have modules set up, so if you'd like to have code accessible across your entire application, we can also use code here as well. So I'm going to click done. This is probably something which is going to confuse you a lot, because once you press edit and you add something and then you go to click on it, it won't click. So just make sure you press that done button at the top right. We have this part here, which is our main coding window. So for example, if I let x equal 7, let y equal 10, and then I want to print out x plus y, and then run my code, we have this new console, which came in the last version, which will show our output. So if you are teaching algorithms, we've got a really nice, quick way to develop that. Particularly when I'm teaching things like classes to my students, I want to ensure that it runs quickly, and I think that's a real benefit of playgrounds over a full Xcode project, is that instant feedback that students gain. So I'm going to turn this off. And actually, when you're developing interfaces, as we're going to do now, we actually want to turn off that console, because it's going to cause some issues, because we want to output to this screen. And I'm hoping this is some of the stuff which is going to disappear in the new version. From the previews we saw at WWDC, it looked very similar in the way that it displays and the way we enter our code, but there is a little issue at the moment with this console. So if you find that you were writing code and it was working perfectly fine, but then all of a sudden it just stopped working, it's probably because this turned back on. And if you leave your playground and come back, the console will turn back on. So if you go to sleep with a problem and then go to sleep with working code and you come back and there's a problem, it's probably because of this console. Okay, so we're going to get started now on our first milestone, and we're just going to create a little view and present it to the live view, which will appear on our right-hand side. I'm going to give myself a little bit more room. I'm going to just remove this console by clicking on that icon, and I'm going to import the necessary libraries. So we need to have playground support. This is unique to Swift Playgrounds. It's not something which you'll use if you're converting this to an Xcode project, but hopefully we're not going to have to do that anymore when we get our new version, and we can push directly from Swift Playgrounds. The next thing we're going to do is to import SwiftUI. So this is the new way of developing our storyboards, as we did previously with UIKit. There's no more drag and drop. We sort of have this structured content, which I'm showing you now. So we start off with a struct. Just going to make sure that you spell it correctly. We're going to create a content view, and this is a default structure for the way that we create our views. So we have a content with a subtype of, which is a subtype of view. Then we're going to initialize this view. You often don't need to do this, but we're going to play with some public views as well. So we just need to do this for now, and then we can define the body. Now, if you do forget the structure of this, we can also go to the plus symbol at the top right. And within Swift Playgrounds, it actually gives you the defined structures for you. So it helps you out a little bit, particularly if you're jumping between languages, it can become complicated. All right, so we're going to do this one more time. I do have an error here. That's because I've got nothing inside my body, but I shall fix it up in a minute. I'm now going to create my main view. So I'll add a comment, my main view, and I'm going to call this profile view, again of the same view. Initialize it, and I'm going to create a body. I did mention in the beginning that some people have come in a little bit late. I have recorded this session, so I will make it available for all of you. So if you did miss any of this or you want to rewind, then it will be available for you later on. I know it's difficult to try and follow someone when they're coding at the same time. Okay, so I've created this second view, which is going to sit inside my main view. So I'm going to call this now profile. Okay, and I can see at the bottom here, it's actually appeared for me because I've defined it, so I can click there. It takes a little bit of getting used to, but it's well worth keeping your eye on this autocorrect section at the bottom here, just as you're coding, particularly when you're writing large parts like I'm going to next. It's important that you type it correctly, and little typos can become very frustrating, particularly in the classroom with your students. Okay, so I have my main view, I have my profile view that's going to sit inside the body of it, and now what I'm going to do is present this to the live view within Swift Playgrounds. So this is unique to Swift Playgrounds. I'm going to get my playground page again and click at the bottom. As I press that period, it gives all the options which are available. So I'm going to go to the current page. I'm going to set my live view to my content view. So now when I run my code, again, make sure my console's turned off. It does pop back up, which is very frustrating. And we run it, I now have my red view available to me. Okay, so this is the first milestone. We're going to do 3 of these milestones. I'll just check in the chat. I've had my eyes off the chat a little bit, so I just want to make sure everyone is still with me. Okay, looks like everyone's okay. Thanks, Andy, for helping Ryan out there. So this is the end of our first milestone. So I'll flick back to my slides just so we can all, keep track. This is the end of our first milestone. We're now going to create a tab view, and inside that tab view, we're going to have two different views. We'll have our red view and our blue view. So you'll see now why I had to initialize those structs. If this is very new for you, don't worry too much. It'll start to make more sense as we progress. Okay, so I'm going to bring out my directory again. I'm going to drag my live view away just to give myself some space. So what we're going to do now is to create a second view within a tab view. Okay, so within my main body, I can add in a tab view. And if you're familiar with web development, if you've done anything like that, this begins to become quite familiar when you're dealing with these hierarchies and structures. So inside my tab view, I'm going to put my profile view, and then I can use my dot operator to look at the elements of that view. So I can change the tab item to become an image, and then I can use my system icons. So I'm going to call this person.fill. Okay, I'll run that again. You can see now I have a tab view. So if I was to add a second view to this, I could simply grab my profile view and I can display it twice. So we've got that level of abstraction built in. So now I've got 2 different views. And I can change this icon as well. So for example, I'm going to change this to game controller. Okay, and now I can easily see which I've got the 2. But at the moment, we're showing the same view twice, so we want to actually create 2. We're going to create a high level of abstraction here. I'm going to create a new page within my modules, which will allow me to move these out a little bit. So I'm going to click Edit. Within my shared code, I'm going to add a new file. This one will be called profile.swift. I can go back to my main tab. I can grab my strut, move it into, oops, again, it'll press that done button, gets me every time. I want to import my SwiftUI because that's the library I'm using, and I'm going to paste this in there. Now, a couple of things that we're going to need to do. We're going to need to, sorry, I'm just going to let someone in. Welcome, Evan. So a couple of things that we're going to need to do. We're going to need to make these public so that it can be accessible from here. So at the moment it's saying your profile view doesn't exist. So I need to go inside my profile view and I need to make these public. Okay, so this is just our permissions to ensure that it is accessible across my entire project. Okay, so now when I go back to my main view, it seems to be still working. I can click run. Yep, it's still working. And again, that's that instant feedback I was talking about with the students. If you go run a project in Xcode, I don't have a new M1 MacBook yet, and they seem to be a lot quicker, but it takes the students a lot of time. There's a lot of that. Having that instant feedback is really beneficial for my students. Okay, so I have my red profile. I'm going to create the exact same thing for a new one called my game view. So again, edit, create a new Swift file. I'll call this gameview.swift. Okay, again, this is going to be exactly the same structure. Press the done button. It's the exact same structure as what we were doing before. So I can copy all of my code. I can move it over to my game tab and press view. Now I've got an error because they're both called the same thing. So let's change this one to game. Let's make it blue just to make sure. Our main. So currently we're calling our profile view and our profile views. We need to change one of these to game view. And now when we run our code, we should have our red view and our blue view. Making sure that everyone is still with me. So this is the end of our second milestone. Again, I have also included for you some resources. So if you do have your phone with you, you can scan this QR code, and there is a link there as well. I'll give you a few seconds to do that. And I can also copy and paste that into the chat, which I will do now, just while some of you are scanning. Inside this Padlet, what I've made available, which I'll scoot to now. So that link is inside the chat, if you'd like to go there. But within this Padlet, what I've done is pre-recorded each of those milestones. So if you missed on what I did in that first demonstration for the red view, I've just recorded that one section again for the blue section. And then as we go into this next section, we have that available as well. So I'm going to model something slightly different. Rather than you watching me code this third section, what I'm going to get you to do is to actually download it yourself. So as I mentioned, these Swift Playground files are pretty versatile, and it's very easy for you to share and make these things available. So what we can do is to download the file. Oops. And download it. From there, it'll open up into your Swift Playgrounds. Milestone 3. And the tutorial, what it'll allow you to do, we don't have enough time for you to watch me code this, it will allow you to develop and create. Oh, see how I've got this error here? Again, turn off your console. It's very frustrating. I hope it's going to be in the new version. But what we're going to do is to create this profile view, and then the next one that we'll develop. So what I'd like you to do is have a go at downloading it. Sorry, yes, I will post the link again for you, Eric. Oh, sorry, I'm just sending it to Kane, that's why. Spamming Kane. There we go. Let's try it with everyone. There we go. So each of those milestones is available for you. As I mentioned, I have pre-recorded each of the stages. This is just kind of a taster for you all to get you up and running and get you to have a little play with it. I realize it is very difficult to hard code while you're watching a demonstration at the same time, particularly if you are only have a single device in front of you. But available to you now is this working prototype of creating a profile. You can see how we can start to build up our project. So you were familiar with that initial struct, which I showed you previously. We have then put them into vertical stacks, horizontal stacks. If you've done any Xcode before and you've any development with UI kit and you've played with auto layout, you'll definitely appreciate how these horizontal stacks and vertical stacks dynamically change according to the content that you have. We've also got these magical spaces which help you out as well. But then from there, I have my different elements, a bit like if you were doing HTML and you had your image and your text and your paragraph. We have my image, which is a block, which makes it available. So I have my image block. All of the clipping, for example, the circle shape, which I clipped around my face. This is done all dynamically through the code. You can also rotate and flip as well. We can add in our padding as you would, again, with cascading style sheets if you're familiar with web development. We have the text block, which is automatic styling, so like you do with your Word formatting. We have a title, and again, I have some subtext as well and some more spacing. We can quite easily add backgrounds and play with different colors as well. So I've defined this gradients at the top, but we could easily change those to have a little play around. So these are available to you. As I mentioned in the beginning, what I have put together for you is a little bit of learning for you to continue. So I do have tutorials available to continue on. I do have each of these slides available to you, which help explain the code. So you can take your time, work your way through it. But I'm hoping from this that at least you've got yourself up to a good place. You feel confident and comfortable to open up Swift Playgrounds and have a little bit of go. But I'd like to open up the floor to any questions. So what I'll do is I will stop sharing my screen. I have the chat open and I'll happily answer any questions for you. Yes, so Chad, I'll put the code back up again. I'll put the QR code up for you. And Chad has also put in the full URL for you. Apparently there's a little bit of error with that URL that I copied across. Okay, well, if I don't have any questions, I will leave you to start getting ready for your next session. I believe there's a couple more sessions on this morning. If you're from Italy, I know there's a couple from Italy, congratulations. If there's anyone from the UK, commiserations. Maybe one day it'll come home for you, but until then, keep working on your penalties. Thanks, Dave. Glad you enjoyed Padlet. I'll hang around a little bit longer if anyone wants to ask any questions. Thanks, Evan. Good to see you. Thanks, Craig.